working on our brochure with Jen. We seem to have her doing all kinds of things. I thought, oh no, she's not going to want to do another program, but she is. So we are very grateful to her for coming through today and providing us with this wonderful program. When electricity came to Greene County, Denise Band.
Can you all hear me without this microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Margaret, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Greene County History buffs, for being here today. I hope this program will electrify you to continue your interest in our county's history. Well, I don't have any slides today because you can't see electricity, except for lightning, of course. Thank you, Benjamin Franklin, and your kite and your key for figuring out the connection between lightning and electricity in 1752. I guess you'll just have to look at me and all the ready kilowatts. Ready kilowatt became a symbol of electricity throughout the nation. He got to start, you won't believe this, in Alabama in the 1920s as a marketing symbol. And we all love that little guy. These readies are part of a collection put together by Jane Rowland, who's of Jefferson, whose dad, Bill Pierce, worked for IES, a Northwest Iowa electric company. These treasured readies are delicate, so please don't touch because you might get shocked. But long before Benjamin Franklin was out flying kites in a thunderstorm, centuries of study went into the phenomenon of electricity. The Chinese knew about it before the dawn of recorded history. They knew about magnetism. And a man named Thales, who lived 600 years before Christ, noticed that when he rubbed amber, it could pick up lint, and that would be static electricity. In fact, the word electricity comes from electron, the Greek word for amber. I think that's pretty cool. William Sturgeon, in the early 19th century, was an English inventor and physicist, and he produced the first electromagnet, which led to the invention of the telegraph, electric motor, and numerous other devices basic to modern technology. The inventors kept working on electricity, and finally, after 1,000 attempts, Thomas Edison got something right in 1879. And his company, which he named GE, General Electric, lit up a street in New York City in 1881. Jefferson's first light company was organized in 1883. That electricity idea just zapped across the country. So after he lit up New York in 81, Jefferson was on the ball in 1883. And the first lights in town turned on in 1884. The lights then burned only during the evening hours until January of 1900, when day service became available. And by 1907, lights could burn all day and night. And the night owls were happy. By the way, Greene County's second courthouse, a brick building erected in 1870, was lit up soon after Jefferson got electricity. In 1908, the company gave out electric irons on a trial basis, asking housewives to compare them to their heavy stove-heated irons. We all know what those are because we've seen them at the museum. Sales of electric irons skyrocketed. And then came electric fans, toasters, vacuum cleaners, and the refrigerators became popular in the 1920s. Familiar names that got that first electric company going, I'm sure that you'll recognize them. David Milligan, R.M. Riley, and S.E. Lee. In 1907, Percy Gray, whose name is etched deeply in Jefferson history, bought the company and began running it more efficiently. And he extended the service. Although the original owners were good businessmen, they didn't know a whole lot about electricity. 1912, Gray contacted with the Iowa Railway and Light Company. A lot of the early light companies were associated with the railroads because the railroads had engines that could provide the power. So anyway, Gray sold it to Iowa Railway and Light to buy power. He contracted with the railway to get a high line service, and he gave up operating the local plant so he could concentrate on a new business, getting electricity into houses so electric stoves could be used. And now, you know, we're all supposed to use electric stoves, although some of us love our gas stoves. I wish I had one. And then, of course, Percy Gray went on into the electric water heater business, thermally. By about 1920, most of Greene County's smaller towns also had electricity. Dana got it in 1915, and Rippey got it, Nancy, Rippey got electricity in 1916. Townships had streetlights and electric appliances like washing machines and those wonderful irons. Each little town had its own privately owned plant, usually powered by a diesel engine. Eventually, the towns bought out the private companies and formed their own municipal electric utilities. Dale Higgins of Grand Junction told me he knows that Grand Junction had electricity by 1920 because his grandmother, Ella Kersey, had an electric car. And she bought that automobile after she became a widow because she couldn't crank the gasoline engine. And lots of widows, you know, fairly well-off widows, had electric cars. Mrs. Kersey just plugged it in, waited for the charge, and took to the road. And in 1930, Jefferson's High School football field, which I think was located north across the highway from the cemetery at that time, got electric light. Go Ramblers. They were the Ramblers, not the Rams. Within a year of when the bigger towns got electricity, of course, the little ones wanted it, like Rippey and David. And it took off like wildfire, according to Tom Wynn, who farms between Cooper and Herndon, and has, as we know from his recent History Society program, quite an interest in power producing wind turbines. Today, his farm gets its power from Alliant Energy, which is sort of unusual for a farm, but here's the story. That's because his farm is about half a mile south of Cooper, and his grandfather paid in the 1920s to have a line run out to his place from that little town's power plant. One of his neighbors waited and got his electricity years later from the REC. But while the towns were lit up, the countryside was left in the dark, making do with candles and kerosene lamps. Remember that smell of kerosene lamp that our grandparents had in the basement somewhere probably? They needed those things to read and to work by, with windmills to pump water from wells for their stock and for the drinking water and bath water for cooking and cleaning. The term carry the water means to perform a menial task. And in pre-electricity days, that usually meant the kids, who not only had to carry it, but pump it by hand. And in those days, it was early to bed and early to rise, because farmers depended on natural light, and also make hay while the sun shines. A 1919 Department of Agriculture study found that rural families spent 10 hours a week pumping water and carrying it into their houses. And the study also found that women with electricity spent 20 fewer days a year washing. City women spent 20 hours a year less than farm women, who with the farm women had their boilers and their wash bowls. You know what's coming. Some farms had their own generating plants and wired their homes and barns for electricity. The Delco Light Company made a farm generator unit, a gas engine, charged a battery that stored the electricity. I'm sure that many of you remember Dorothy Bowley, who was a longtime teacher here at Jefferson. She got a Delco system for a wedding present when she married a Hardin Township farmer in the 1930s. Once long ago, I got a vacuum cleaner for Christmas. I wasn't happy. Dorothy was happy with her Delco. Why did it take so long for farms to get electricity? You know the answer. Money. It was the cost of installing the lines. Studies showed it could cost up to $2,000 a mile. And by the way, by the end of the 30s, because of something really important that's coming up, that cost had dropped to $825 a mile because someone had put up the money. Who put up the money?
Government.
Yes. After Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office in 1933, in the depths of the Depression, the idea of rural electrification, and I gotta say that electrification about 100 more times, so if I slip, because it's got a lot of syllables. Anyway, people wanted electricity. In May of 1935, Roosevelt signed an executive order establishing the Rural Electrification Administration. 1 year later, Congress passed the Rural Electrification Act, probably the most important piece of legislation passed as part of FDR's New Deal. It was very important here in Greene County. The law allowed the federal government to make low-cost loans to farmers so they could form rural electric co-ops. Poles and power lines began going up across the countryside. An electric co-op is owned by its owners, and when that co-op makes a profit, like they do today, the owners share in that profit. Greene County's rural electrification began in 1938. But before that, there was a lot of work to be done. In early 1937, 300 farmers, think of that, 300 farmers in this county, attended a meeting called by the Farm Bureau, and they named their project the Greene County Electric Cooperative. One farmer from each of the county's townships was named to investigate how the program would work. The job of that committee was to map the territory, secure wholesale power rates, franchises, and rights-of-way. Iowa Light and Power submitted the lowest bid for wholesale rates, and that contract was signed in April of 1937, just about a month after this big committee. So those farmers who were doing the grunt work really got out. But at that time, don't tell me I mixed up my. At that time, Washington was low on funds because everybody wanted in on this program. And Greene County REC got only $5,000, less than half what was needed to build a substation and run 88 miles of line to the 136 farmers who had already signed up. By May of 1937, the Jefferson Herald reported that 341 farmers had paid, remember this is 1937, $2,500 apiece for membership in the co-op. The Herald said, any farmer within 2.5 miles of a trunk line can be assured that the trunk will be built past them, but they have to be a member of the co-op to connect. That $2,500 membership amounted to about 1/4 of a farmer's annual income. And those who were willing to pay shows you how much they and their wives wanted that electricity. The first line was energized on April 1st, 1938, and I looked and I looked and I looked to find out where it was, but I couldn't find it, but maybe someone here knows also. Some farmers were reluctant to get online, mostly because of cost, of course. Luman Wilcox, whom many of you remember, was a young Jefferson lawyer at that time. He took it upon himself to persuade the holdouts, and he trudged along the country roads. At first, he didn't have much luck, but when he began to speak to the farm wives, the lights went on in their husband's brains. And Lumen got their okays. And a farmer south in Jefferson was so eager to get the lights on that he and his boys cut down the trees and the stumps out on the strip of land where the light poles and their wires would run, so it would be easier and faster to hook up to electricity. And here's a really good tale, I love this one. A farmer west of Jefferson was worried about his hens. He believed that they stopped laying when the poles and wires went up along his road. But most farmers, and especially their wives, loved electric light, even if it were a bare bulb hanging over the kitchen table. Of course, the progress for electricity slowed during World War II, but roared ahead after the war ended. In under 2 decades, the REA electrified the nation. Greene County's ERC became a large co-op. By 1948, the Herald reported that it was, quote, one of the strongest RECs in the nation, with 958 miles of lines and 2,700 members in 9 counties, including